Schwab Asset Management is proud to sponsor the Advisor Upside podcast with ETF.com. With bond market conditions looking upbeat for 2024, Schwab stands ready with a suite of low-cost fixed income ETFs. Learn more at schwabassetmanagement.com/welcome-ETFs. Hello and welcome to the Advisor Upside podcast powered by ETF.com. I'm your host, Jeff Benjamin, and we're talking today with Matt Ackermann, the Chief Content Officer at Integrated Partners. We're talking about his new book entitled Center Stage. Hey, Matt, how you doing? Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jeff. Always great to chat with you.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. It's kind of an interesting story here. You and I bumped into each other at a conference in Florida a couple of weeks ago. And you gave me one of your books, a new book that published when
Yeah, it just came out earlier in May, so yeah,
okay.
it's still fresh, hot off the presses.
Yeah, hot off the presses. Anyway, you told me a little bit about it, and that's what we're going to do now. We're going to talk about it, but I wanted I read the thing in about 2 days.
Oh wow.
Most of it was on the return flights home. It's really good stuff. I mean, I was just impressed with. I mean, I've been working in reporting on financial services for a long time, and this is a book about financial services and practice management, what's interesting to me, or what was interesting to me, is I don't I'm not a financial advisor. I don't run a practice. I'm not in charge of a single person in this whole world, and I got so much out of this book because it's there's like a lot of little life lessons in there about, I don't know. But we'll get into all that. But I want to mention your co-authors here too. Andre Moore, president of Integrated Partners. Matt, you are obviously the chief content officer at Integrated Partners, and Paul Saganey, founder and CEO of Integrated Partners. You guys worked on this together. And I'm not going to do justice to this because I'm going to let you do it, Matt. But I want to just tell our audience that the book is titled Center Stage, and it weaves throughout these anecdotes of the music industry. Every chapter talks about some story in the music industry, an artist, a song. I found myself throughout the book kind of, pausing and Googling this person because I was like, that's interesting. I didn't know that about Elton John or the Wu-Tang crew. And I definitely have been following up since, listening to some of the music that's referenced in the book. But first of all, Matt, tell the story of how this book came together, because it's pretty cool.
So the idea of the book originated from Paul Saganey, who said to us offhandedly, you have to be the star of your practice. You have to think like
Mm-hmm.
Elton John. He's like, Elton John doesn't go out and sell the tickets or sell the popcorn. Elton John just focuses on what he does best, which is ultimately to be the star at center stage. And
Mm-hmm.
then everything else, his team around him, all the people he works with, they handle things from there. And it really struck me, that tiny analogy. And I said, I think there's a story in that. Advisors by and large struggle with growth because they entered this industry to be advisors, not CEOs. They didn't enter this to be business owners, and now they're thrust into business ownership and they're not ready for it. What they're really good at is working hard for their clients. But
Mm-hmm.
so many advisors struggle when it comes to things like hiring, firing, and growth, and adding clients, and being a rainmaker, when really they just want to sit down and help their clients. So it's what really was who are the people around you? Who's your Bernie Taupin? Who is, your Davy Johnstone, your band leader? Who are all these different people that are helping you? So it was funny because as I put this together, it started out as kind of a, this homage to Elton John almost. But then as we grew it and I started really writing it, I realized there's so many other stories in this industry that we've heard of in the past that really align with lots of other industries, things around branding. There's a great
Uh-huh.
chapter about David Bowie. There's a great chapter around, around, we mentioned the Wu-Tang Clan. I thought there was a cool chapter around Weezer and really systematizing your practice. That's fun. But really at the end of the day, it's just, I think too often when we talk to people and educate folks, we get in a textbook mindset. And I don't know about you, but I've always preferred to be entertained as I'm being educated.
Right.
So I find that, I've always been somebody who likes to entertain as we kind of go along with our writing. And I know I've followed your writing for so long, Jeff, and I know you're the same way. When you write a lead and you carefully craft a story, you know that it's as much about getting people to lean in. Once you have their attention, then all of a sudden you could take off. So, as a great writer as you are, I know how important that piece of it is getting people to really lean in.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I found so fascinating about this. I mean, I have this rule that I don't like to tell a lot of people about because it opens some doors that I might
Hmm.
not want open, is that whenever somebody gives me a book, I read it. I don't
Hmm.
care, so when you gave me that book in Florida, I was like, well, I'm going to read this book now. I hope it's good, right? Because I'm going to finish it. And I'm reading it. I'm like, this is really good stuff. It's helpful. I know it's helpful for financial advisors, or it would be if they read it, but it was helpful for me. I mean, I picked up on a lot of things. Plus, I just love that little music history trivia that's just thread throughout the book. I mean, the David Lee Roth story and the brown M&Ms. I had heard that story and I had heard it just the way it was described in the book, that, oh, that was people took, the media picked that up and they said it's just an example of these celebrities being spoiled and coddled. And what it really was they put that into the contract that they didn't want any brown M&Ms in their dressing room or whatever, because they wanted to make sure that that was, if they read the whole contract, then they would have seen that detail. And when they
Hmm.
saw that there weren't any brown M&Ms in their dressing room, they knew that they were working with quality people. That's just one of the anecdotes in there. But the thing I like about this book, and like I said, if I was in financial planning, I probably would have gotten more out of it, or running any kind of business actually. But you start with, you go from hiring an admin to, all the way through succession planning and tech stacks and different ways of team building. And I don't know. How did you put this together with, I mean, I don't know if did you start with the anecdote from the artist and then fold into your each chapter, or was it the reverse? I mean, that's curious
Yeah.
to me.
So actually, we started, and I'll take you into a little bit of the writing process too. So Andre had twin daughters a year ago. She was
Hmm.
heading out on maternity leave and said, I'm going to go crazy if I'm just sitting in my house, taking care of the girls, feeding
Hmm.
them. And she's like, it'll drive me crazy. And I said, okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to work on this book project. We had talked with Paul about it. He had given us the idea. And I said, I'm going to interview you twice a week. And so much of the meat of each chapter and the outline was Andre's downloads each week, where she would get
Hmm.
into, and we kind of built this outline together saying, okay, talk to me about every element of business building. And ultimately, what are the conversations you have with advisors? Where do they struggle? So we had all of that kind of together. And then what I did from there was each chapter, as we do a week, I would then take it and write from that. So as we talked about admins, I knew
Hmm.
that I wanted to tell this story of Elton John and Davy Johnstone. And, his band leader ultimately knows that Elton hates to practice.
Hmm.
So what he does is he literally brings in a fake Elton John to play the piano while they do all the orchestration. Then Elton comes in for one practice and they go from there. So the whole question was, okay, you have an admin. That admin has to be that Davy Johnstone. They have to be able to do all these things. So ultimately, you can just get dropped into place and do what you do best while they do what they do best.
Hmm.
So essentially, what I would do each week is I would think about that story. And then ultimately, if I was telling that story to somebody who knew nothing about wealth management, how could I impress it upon them? How could they understand it in a way? I call it my mom test, and I've been using this test for years. If I was telling my mother this story of something, because we often with financial services, wealth management, we have to explain things that are hard to explain. When you're explaining an ETF to your mom, you'll use an analogy because of the
Hmm.
fact that it's a tough concept to get. So I've always found that if my mom can understand this, then anybody can understand it. So therefore,
Hmm.
that's always been kind of the test I've used. It's why like I would end up back when I worked at Investment News, creating ideas where I was like, I'm going to build a reality show, or we're going to make a documentary this way. It was always about it. Can I create a piece of content that's so interesting that even someone outside of this industry would want to lean in and watch it and experience it or read it?
Hmm. Yeah, full disclosure here, Matt and I used to work together at Investment News before I joined ETF.com, and before Mark Matt was
Mhm.
at Integrated. I know you were a few other places before Integrated, right?
Yeah,
Between
well,
Investment
I
News and
jumped
Integrated.
straight from investment news to integrated, but before that, I did have a chance to work at some cool publications like Financial Planning and American Banker. So yeah,
Hmm.
anywhere I go, I tend to tell people I have the fun job. While Jeff was busy writing really important stories, I would be doing things like a video shoot where I lived on a houseboat for a week with an advisor or something like that. So I always get the fun stuff to do while Jeff had the hard work to do.
What was the objective of this book? I mean, you kind of laid out how it came together, and I think that's fascinating. You know, that you went and
Mhm.
just picked
Yeah.
Andre's brain for
Mhm.
I don't know how long that was,
Yeah,
but
it's like 3 months.
and you
Yeah.
got a lot of good stuff. But did you want it to be kind of a how-to practice management book? Did you? I mean, even the way it's written, it can be read in bite-sized chapters, and the chapters aren't that long. And there's a lot of times there's a little workshop or a little assignment to do at the end of each chapter, and I confess I didn't do any of those because
They're not designed, but again, those music lessons were really meant like so you're an advisor, and you're right. I don't think it's a book that has to be read linearly. I think you
hmm
can read it, you can jump around. If you're somebody who's thinking about succession planning, jump into that chapter. If you're somebody
hmm
that's struggling when it comes to how to find a good partner or CPA to grow your business, read that chapter. And then at
hmm
the end, yeah, we put those music lessons in so that people could then continue that kind of education and learning. Maybe it's here's 3 resources I like to read about this topic, or
hmm
here's a quick marketing assessment you can take. I don't think there's any secrets in this industry, and I really do believe that like for people to really grow, they have to be open themselves up to new ideas, take themselves out of their box, and try something different. Really, our objective was just that. Our objective was growth. How do we help advisors take themselves out of the mindset of can't and into a mindset of like, hey, this is totally possible. It's possible to be a great CEO and a great advisor. The key is having great people and great resources around you to help you every step of the way. In general, I think advisors struggle with organic growth. They struggle with getting a business to thrive because of the fact that it's just not in their kind of original skill set. Their
hmm
original skill set was being a helper. I'm an advisor that is here to help clients, and now they're thrust into a very different role. So, what can we give them in terms of tools, in terms of stories, in terms of whatever they may need so they can ultimately stand out. And it's hard. I mean, the truth of the matter is most advisors, if you look at 5 advisors, they from the outside looking into a client, they look similar. And it's like, well, but the truth is we've spoken to enough advisors throughout our career to know that each one is very different, what their focus is, what their skills are, and making sure you align with the right person who's right for you as a client is difficult. And making sure as an advisor that you're building the practice and business you want is difficult. So wouldn't it be great to have a readable resource that can help you to really stand out and do well?
Yeah, I I really enjoyed the stories and the lessons about uh, being an advisor and being a business owner and being a manager and knowing where you need to set your limits and where you need to stop and hand off a lot of times is about handing off and relying on people that are maybe it is it's time to hand off some of your clients to an associate advisor or something like that because that frees you up to do other things and how much reliance that an advisor can have on somebody else. I love the anecdote in there about Paul Saganey. There was something written in the book by the way, the book includes a lot of like essays from other people,
Yeah.
including Paul and Andre, and Paul's assistant, I can't remember her name, but
Ellen Smith, great,
yeah,
great,
Ellen
great
Smith.
pickup. That is a great
She
anecdote.
was she was talking about she lived in Florida or lives in Florida. There was a hurricane coming, and she was really stressed out about it, I guess, and I don't know at what stage the hurricane, it seemed like it had already passed, but Paul showed up at her house and helped. And
Hmm.
she said it was the first time he learned how to use a shop vac and some other stuff. And I mean, I just to me that I mean, that just struck me. Like that's the kind of stuff you know that it sticks with you, and it shows the kind of loyalty and dedication and appreciation. And that, like I said, again, I'll say it again, I'm not an advisor, I don't run any businesses, but I learned some lessons throughout this book of, things that I can look at differently and maybe be a little bit different.
Yeah, I think so much of putting the book together, um, on one level, I think it is a very much practice management book, and it can be read on that level.
Hmm.
But beneath that, I think there is so many, to your point, good life lessons where, if you, I guess I've always lived my life that like uh, kind people are my kind of people. And I find that like just leading with kindness, leading with an open heart, leading with a willingness that like I don't know everything and I'm going to learn something new. And sometimes, maybe this isn't the right thing for me at this moment. I'm going to get there by just continuing to learn and keeping an open mind to a different thought process. And really, it's been amazing getting a chance to work with both Paul and Andre because I think they think and lead the same way, where it's a lot about a willingness and an openness to other perspectives and points of view. And that's really what the book is about: is open yourself up to a different perspective and point of view. Say, hey, I don't know everything, and I'm going to glean one or two or three things from there. I think that's always the most important thing. I think sometimes people read a book thinking it's supposed to give them one answer, when in the
Hmm.
truth is, you're going to learn something different from reading it than the next advisor and then an advisor after that.
Yeah.
I think that's really what a good book or a good piece of content is all about. It's what the audience is going to get out of it, and that's really the goal here.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
What did you have to spend the most time researching? The musical artist or the financial advice?
It's so funny because the financial advice is so first person from so many people that they would
Hmm.
just give me their opinions. And often when I went back and then had to fact check and edit, there was a lot of elements of that. But if you go through the bibliography of this book, so much of it is the music lessons because you would start with saying, okay, I've heard this story about David Lee Roth and the Brown
Hmm.
M&M. So I'm going to write this, but now I want to get attribution for it. Now I want to make sure that it's not just a,
Yeah.
some sort of, tale that we've passed on from person to person. But I literally found an interview with David Lee Roth talking about this, or, here's a Rolling Stone article that talks about, this element of Elton John, or here's a Wu-Tang piece. So those elements to me, which were super fun, obviously, and somebody
Hmm.
said to me they want to bring me to some musical trivia night now that I've got all this in my head.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to me, those things required a little more research, just from the perspective of like, I didn't want somebody to go, oh, you got that whole story about the band and Bob Dylan totally wrong. Like that would have offended me so much if I
Right.
got any of those elements wrong. So there was a lot of research that went into that. The funny part is I had done a draft that was all Elton John stuff. So there's a whole bunch of Elton John knowledge in my head that I haven't gotten even to bring to anybody in a book
Yeah,
yet.
I
So that's
bet.
coming at some point too. So
Yeah, like I said, the music trivia was fun for me. And my wife picked the book up a week or so ago and read a couple of chapters. And she said, because she's a big music fan, I thought
yeah.
she would, enjoy it too. And she came away with the same thing. She goes, "This is like a self-help book for anybody." Um,
That's what my dad said. My dad said the same thing. So my dad nicely picked it up and read it. Wrote him a nice inscription. I figured that's all I had to do. But he was like, there's stuff in here that, I don't even own a wealth management practice. And I like just, free in my mind. And the attention to detail stuff, which I thought was interesting that he picked up on was so important. He loved the concept of dice, which is what the
mhm.
book really is. It's that effort to be different, impactful, compelling, and exciting. And
Yeah.
essentially, if you build content that's dice, and Jeff, you do this all the time. When you build content that's exactly like that, then that's when people really engage the most with it. I mean, I know I can speak from experience from when we worked at Investment News together. I'm sure there was pieces that you've written in the past in your career that you were just, getting done with. And then there's pieces you were super proud of, a cover
Hmm.
story, so those
Hmm.
were the most dice pieces you did. And I'm sure those are the ones that people still come back and talk to you about.
Yeah. Um, One thing I wanted to reference is there's a chapter here on, I can't remember the name of the chapter, maybe you do. It
Mhm.
talks about being a diva. And
Yes.
it made me think about divas, well, as it was supposed to, think about divas. Next time somebody calls me a diva or a prima donna, I'm not going to feel so bad. I mean,
You're gonna
it's
you're gonna say thank you. You're gonna say
thank
yes.
you.
It's all about attention to detail, and I think
Yeah.
that's really what it's so funny because I think the whole idea of a diva, we have this vision in our head. It's like
Hmm.
it's this singer, it's Whitney Houston. She's closing her dressing room. Maybe it's Axl Rose who refuses to go
Hmm.
until 11 o'clock at night because things aren't exactly right. But to me, a diva really is so tuned in around their craft that they just have a higher level of expectations. And that's not such a bad thing. I think, I've never been described as a diva, but I can now understand how it can definitely be a positive rather than a negative.
Hmm. I want to ask you this one question, and I know I'm leaning hard on the music stuff
Oh, no,
because
it's fine.
it was like I said, what gets you going to the next chapter, like, oh man, I got to know the next anecdote here. Um, you talk about it, it's chapter 13. I'm looking at it right now, The Edge of Glory. And you're talking about the power of raving fans. And my only question is, you mentioned Katy Katz,
Yeah, Lady
uh,
Gaga, I
yeah,
mentioned in there. Yeah.
yeah, and but you leave out to me the biggest, most well-known raving fans that I
Were you
can
gonna go
think of.
Beatlemaniacs?
Well, I'm thinking about Deadheads
Oh
and
yeah, it's a great
Parrot
one.
Heads.
Yeah, and Fish and the
Right,
Fish fans too. Like
right.
they are huge fan bases. And if you think
Hmm.
about what do all of those fan bases have in common is they create this amazing communities where if you went to a Grateful Dead concert or a Fish show, you show up in the parking lot and you don't have a ticket. Someone out there will make a trade with you. You'll figure out a way to get into the
Hmm.
show. And that's really what this is about is that power of fans and community. Like to me, it is understated in this industry and everywhere else where it begins to become a self-fulfilling prophecy success
Hmm.
because of the fact you don't have to market the same way anymore. You don't have to go out and advertise the same way anymore because that
Right.
community begins to build upon itself and they begin to tell others about you. They can't wait to tell others about this great service or this great product or something that you gave them that no one else could. So it's like, how do you build up those fans? We live in a day and age where literally we can go to social media and Twitter and count the number of people that are following each of us.
Right.
And ultimately that can become kind of this weird thing because I think there's an echo chamber in social media where we're talking to one another. But at the same time, I think there's so many elements where people are constantly watching, judging, and there's a lot of elements of that. But I mean, to me, when you can have that community around you that is telling others about you, they can't wait to share, they can't wait to give you a referral.
Hmm.
That stands out, and that's enormously important. Now, building that fan base, it can be difficult and it can take a long time in your career. But once you have that groundswell, it'll really start to build upon itself.
What did you learn, Matt, in doing the research for this book?
Mhm. I guess what I learned is like, because at first I really thought there was a one size fits all blueprint. I really did. I really
Hmm.
said to myself, if you do A, B, and C in this order, you're going to succeed. So what I started to do was I tested the hypothesis of the outline on a couple advisors I knew. And what they seemed to begin to say to me was, it's just, and I said this earlier too, it's just not as linear as that. You don't
Hmm.
jump from one to two to three. And you're going to find advisors that are going to start, like we said, this book you can jump around. You can start in chapter 4 and roam back to 1. And some of them will start to say, well, I didn't build my brand first. My
Hmm.
brand came after I had an admin. And,
Hmm.
I kind of grabbed a lot of people before I found a niche or before, and I never really found the right community. Like, so it's okay. And the truth is, what I learned the most putting this together is everyone has a different course to success, and that's okay. But the people who succeed beyond just initial success are the ones that realize that I can keep learning from here. There's always something new to learn. There's always something cool to kind of grab onto. And, I,
Hmm.
and that I'm proud of. I'm really proud of like, I think it's when you realize like this isn't the only answer, but maybe it'll help you find your answers. That's when I really think that's when it really spurred me to keep kind of going and keep kind of finding
Hmm.
cool stuff as I did research.
Yeah, I was when we just kind of bumped into each other and a couple of weeks ago, and you told me you wrote a book. First thing I thought was sports. I know you're a big
Mm,
sports fan. I obviously didn't, obviously you're a
yeah.
big music fan as well, but I was thinking, okay, this is a sports book. You probably wrote
Hmm.
something about the history of baseball or something.
Hmm.
But and then when you told me about the analogies, the way you did, I'm like, well, maybe he's using sports,
Hmm.
but it was music. What do you think is your favorite chapter, or maybe your favorite part of the book?
Oh, that's It is hard. There's so many different things that I loved putting together. Like the Elton John stuff obviously stands out, specifically some of the elements of, him and Bernie Taupin. What I really liked about that chapter, I think, about Bernie Taupin is he's one of these unsung heroes in music, Bernie Taupin, where he is the writing partner for Elton John, but kind of was able to kind of cruise in the background. Him and Elton
Hmm.
do not have a typical writing relationship where they're sitting next to each other at a piano, banging things out. He sends Elton, here's some lyrics that I've put together, and then Elton puts them to music. I think in its simplest state, it's why they work so well together. They didn't have this, a Lennon McCartney kind of relationship that was
Hmm.
combative at times and eventually falls apart after 10 years because it wasn't a relationship that forced them to sit next to each other to create. It made it easier. So I think as I put that chapter together, it's so interesting to me because I think sometimes we all have this inclination as we hire people or partner with people that we want people like ourselves. And I
Hmm.
think the best partnerships I've ever had in this industry have been people that aren't really like me. They're different, I mean, I had the pleasure to work next to Mark Bruno for years in investment news, and Mark and I were like Bert and Ernie. Like we were very different. Mark very much organized and straight, and this is by the numbers, and here's some metrics around this, and I'd run in and be like, I want to shoot a documentary in Haiti. So like because when you have a relationship with people that doesn't necessarily seem like it fits, it fits. And I think that is hard for people when it comes to partnerships. You want people that are like you hire people that are like you. And when we open our mind to the possibility that, like, hey, someone else with a different perspective might be exactly what I need. And I think that that is important for advisors, but important for all of us. Like, open your mind up to somebody that's totally different. So it was really fun putting that chapter together because as I was writing it, I was thinking about Mark Bruno and the fact that I probably drove that poor man crazy for
Hmm.
years.
Yeah, shout out to Mark Bruno, really good guy. I know him well and have worked with him. Solid guy. Give us as we kind of wrap it up here. Give us a little bit of a trivia tease. What is some little piece of music trivia that you learned that you think might surprise people or interest them?
Well, I mean, I loved the research that I put together on the chapter on Leonard Skinner. I was shocked to learn that Leonard Skinner, who obviously many members of the band died in a plane crash.
Hmm.
The reformation of the band, which included the lead singer's brother, has actually been around longer than Leonard Skinner was around. Like those kind of facts like blew me away in putting the book together was that fact that like and speaking of there's all this talk about hip hop artists that have diss tracks and we're seeing a lot of it now between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. But
Hmm.
you wanted the original diss tracks. You go back and you listen to some Leonard Skinner and Neil Young. Boy, were they dissing each other on those tracks too. So don't think your diss track started with hip hop music artists in the 2000s. No, it's much older than that. That's a tale as old as time.
Okay, and then final question here. What's next? You going to write another book, start a band?
Yeah. Well, I was singing at a piano bar last week at our annual conference, so I'm always ready to sing. I don't think anybody really wants me to start a band though. I told Andre the other day I got a trilogy in my head. And I have a couple other books that I'd really like to work on, but I love the idea of working with people on projects like this. It allows me to stay in my creative lane while then
Hmm.
tapping into these folks. So I had this idea. I actually was pitching an idea to Daniel Crosby the other day, who's a behavioral finance expert. I pitched an idea over to Paul that I'd love to work on with him, really looking at kind of more of a blueprint setup for advisors too. So I've got a lot of ideas, but I think the next one I really would love to write a series of essays with financial advisors talking about the best mistake they've ever made. And I really think there's a cool series of essays in there where I would love to get advisors to really share like the mistakes they made that
Hmm.
ultimately leads to their success. But too often we're all scared to like say, here's a mistake I made. We all want to be perfect, and it's more interesting when people
Yeah,
just are honest.
I like that. And hopefully, if people advisors listen to the end of this podcast, they'll get that message and
Yeah,
they'll reach out to you.
I'd love
Uh,
that.
with that, we're going to let it go. Matt Ackerman, Chief Content Officer at Integrated Partners, and the book is Center Stage: How to Become the Star of Your Practice. Thank you very much, Matt, and stay in touch, all right?
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
All right, folks, thanks for listening. Another episode of Advisor Upside. Also, want to remind you to head over to ETF.com for all your investing and financial planning needs. We've got everything over there. Trust me. If you have an idea or a topic that you'd like to hear us talk about on the Advisor Upside, or you'd like to see us write about or report on in some way at ETF.com, I can be reached at jeff.benjamin@etf.com, or you can find me on X under the handle @BenjiWriter. Thank you, folks. See you next time. Schwab Asset Management is proud to sponsor the Advisor Upside podcast with ETF.com. With bond market conditions looking upbeat for 2024, Schwab stands ready with a suite of low-cost fixed income ETFs. Learn more at schwabassetmanagement.com/welcome-ETFs.